Chapter 1: The Last Call. Dawn broke reluctantly over the last call, spilling weak light through the strategic cracks in the boards covering the windows. Mara Haynes moved through the dim corridors with the quiet efficiency of ritual, her boots making no sound on the worn floorboards. 8 years of survival had taught her that thoroughness kept people alive. Sentimentality did not. Her clipboard contained the same checklist she'd used every morning for the past 3 years: ammunition inventory, food reserves, medical supplies, water purification, structural integrity. The numbers were never good enough. Never would be. She made a notation about the dwindling antibiotics with a pencil worn to a nub. Mara's fingers traced the reinforced doorframe of the east entrance, testing the hinges for weakness. The metal felt cool beneath her skin, solid and dependable in a world where little else was. She pressed her palm against the boards covering the adjacent window, checking for give. There was none. Good. Outside, through the observation slit, the approach to the last call looked like abandoned chaos, debris scattered randomly, the occasional rusted car skeleton tilted at odd angles. Only she and a few others knew that every piece of scrap had been deliberately positioned to slow approaching walkers, to funnel them into the traps hidden beneath seemingly random piles of rubble. The fortified roadhouse's exterior was a lie designed to repel both the dead and the desperate living. Mara completed her circuit of the perimeter and entered the main room. The transition always struck her, from calculated desolation to something almost resembling normality. The massive stone fireplace dominated the far wall, flames already licking at fresh kindling, casting wavering shadows across mismatched furniture. The warmth reached toward her, but didn't quite touch the cold knot lodged permanently beneath her sternum. Jonah Reyes stood in the center of the room, arranging chairs in a loose semicircle. His weathered hands adjusted each seat with precise care, as though setting a stage. Perhaps he was. His low humming filled the space, some tune from before, something that people once played on radios and at parties. The melody felt like a memory that belonged to someone else. "A little early for setup, isn't it?" Mara asked, moving toward the bar with her clipboard. Jonah looked up, the deep lines around his eyes crinkling. "Never too early for story night preparation. Got to get the energy right." He patted the back of a chair that was missing a small chunk from its frame. "This one's lucky. Last 3 people who sat here told winning tales." "Luck doesn't exist anymore," Mara said, but without bite. This was an old argument, comfortable in its familiarity. "That's exactly why we need it." Jonah resumed his humming, shifting another chair 2 inches to the left. Mara ran her hand along the polished hardwood of the bar top, worn smooth by thousands of elbows and forearms. Behind it, bottles lined the shelves, some actually containing pre-outbreak spirits, saved for celebrations, others filled with murky home-brewed concoctions that could either numb pain or cause blindness, depending on the batch. She pulled the heavy leather-bound barter ledger from beneath the bar and flipped it open. The pages were filled with careful notations. No money changed hands anymore, only goods and services. 2 hours of perimeter watch duty for a quarter cup of precious coffee beans. A repaired knife blade in exchange for patching a tarp. A hunting expedition traded for medical attention. The economy of survival, written in different hands but overseen with Mara's exacting standards. 6 more signed up for tonight, Jonah said, interrupting her inventory. "Including that new girl, B. The one with the sketches." Mara nodded, without looking up. "She's been here 6 months. Not exactly new anymore. Newer than most." Jonah dragged another chair from the corner. "You should hear her stories. Girl's got a way of making you see things. Reminds me of—" "We need more antiseptic," Mara cut him off, turning a page in her ledger. "And the northwest trapline needs resetting. 3 of the noisemakers are water damaged." Jonah paused, hand resting on the chair back. "You know numbers don't keep people alive, Mara," he said, his voice gentler now. Stories do. They remind us why we bother. Her pencil stopped moving. She looked up at him, at the shadows the firelight cast across his face, at the hope he insisted on carrying like it wasn't the heaviest burden of all. Stories won't stop walkers when they break through, she replied, her voice terse. No, Jonah agreed, but they might give us a reason to fight them off. He moved another chair into position, with a scrape against the wooden floor. Or a reason to rebuild after. Mara returned to her ledger, but the neat columns of resources and debts blurred before her eyes. She blinked them back into focus. There was no room for distraction, not in this world. Not in her position. The room filled with morning light, as Jonah pulled back one of the heavy curtains covering a reinforced window. Dust motes danced in the beam, swirling in patterns that reminded Mara of the snow globes her mother had collected before. She pushed the thought away. Rowan's bringing in a deer haunch for tonight, Jonah said, moving on to arranging the smaller tables along the walls. Says he found a whole herd 5 miles west. Biggest he's seen in 2 years. Did he check them for infection? Mara asked. It's Rowan, Jonah replied, as if that answered everything. Perhaps it did. Mara closed the ledger with a soft thud. Her inspection was nearly complete, but she found herself lingering, watching Jonah prepare the space with a care that seemed excessive for what was, ultimately, just another gathering of survivors telling exaggerated tales to forget their fear for a few hours. But she knew it was more than that. The story nights had started as simple information sharing, where the herds were moving, which buildings had been picked clean, what new mutations had been spotted. Somehow, over the years, they'd evolved into contests, with winners recorded in the Book of Legends. The competition drove people to take risks, to seek out encounters rather than avoid them. Sometimes Mara wondered if she should have stopped it before it began. Sometimes she wondered if she should stop it now. You're thinking too loud again, Jonah said without looking at her. Someone has to think about consequences. And someone has to think about living. Jonah straightened and rubbed his lower back, wincing slightly. Not just surviving. The familiar argument hung between them, unresolved as always. Mara tucked her clipboard under her arm and headed toward the storage room for the final inventory check. The voices of the first arrivals would soon echo through the reinforced walls, bringing with them tales of heroism and horror in equal measure. And as always, she would listen, evaluate, and remember that both the storytellers and their audience were her responsibility, whether they recognized it or not. Behind her, Jonah resumed his humming, the tune following her down the corridor like a ghost. Morning light filtered through the strategic gaps in the boarded windows, casting thin, dusty beams across the worn floorboards. Mara stood before the wall of shame, studying the crude illustrations and brief descriptions that immortalized the community's most embarrassing zombie encounters. Her eyes traced the familiar handwriting, some belonging to people long dead, their mistakes outliving them. A crude drawing showed a man tangled in his own makeshift trap, surrounded by shambling figures. Beneath it, faded pencil spelled out, Marcus forgot which trees marked his pit trap. 3 broken ribs. One hell of a story. Marcus had died 2 winters ago, not from walkers but from pneumonia. His stories remained. Mara moved to the glass case mounted beside the wall of shame. Empty now, tonight it would hold the Book of Legends, the leather-bound tome where the community recorded its greatest victories against the dead. She ran her fingers along the case's edge, checking for cracks or weaknesses. The book itself was secured in the safe room, brought out only for story nights. Some thought this excessive. Those people usually didn't survive long. Her gaze drifted to a small, faded photograph, pinned at the edge of the wall of shame. 3 women in uniform, emergency management team vests, clipboards in hand, standing before a tent city. Their faces were laughing at some forgotten joke, their postures relaxed in the sunlight of a world that no longer existed. Mara was on the right, younger, her smile unguarded. Her fingers lifted toward the photograph, hovering for a breath. Found these in the back pantry, Jonah's voice broke through her thoughts. Still warm? She turned, hand dropping to her side, the moment of vulnerability sealed away. Jonah approached with 2 steaming mugs, the scent of pine needle tea cutting through the musty air. His eyes had caught her looking at the photograph, but he was kind enough not to mention it. Thanks, she said, accepting the chipped mug. The warmth seeped into her palms. Jonah nodded toward the hearth. Fire's best over there. Floor gets cold this time of year. They moved to the stone fireplace, where flames had settled into a steady burn. Mara sat on one of the low stools Jonah had positioned near enough for warmth, but not so close as to be dangerous. Another lesson learned through others' mistakes. 8 years, Jonah said after a moment, staring into the fire. Doesn't seem possible, does it? Mara sipped her tea. The bitter pine taste had become familiar over the years, almost comforting in its consistency. Some days it feels like 80. And some days it feels like yesterday. His weathered face was lined with memories, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Remember the first story night? Mara's posture remained rigid, her shoulders a straight line of perpetual readiness. But something in her voice softened just slightly. 7 survivors. This fireplace. Middle of winter. Too scared to speak above a whisper, Jonah continued, his own voice dropping as if in memory. Convinced that every sound would bring them down on us. It nearly did, Mara reminded him. The herd that passed through that night. But it didn't, Jonah interrupted gently. We survived, talked through the night, shared what we knew, what we'd seen. He took a sip from his mug. Next morning, we weren't strangers anymore. Mara remembered the terror of those early days, the desperate scramble for weapons, for shelter, for any scrap of information about what was happening. The confusion as communication systems failed. The horror as the first wave of infection swept through emergency shelters. The realization that no help was coming. We were lucky, she said. Jonah shook his head. We were prepared. You were prepared. He gestured around the reinforced room with his free hand. This place didn't become safe by accident. And it won't stay safe by getting complacent. Mara stood, setting her half-empty mug on the hearthstones. We've lost 3 people in the last 2 months to storytelling stunts. People taking unnecessary risks for a better tale. People living, Jonah said quietly. On their own terms. People dying. On my watch. The words came out sharper than she intended. Jonah's reply was cut short by a sound that made them both freeze. 3 short rings from the outer perimeter alarm. The signal for friendly approach. Mara's transition was immediate. The momentary softness vanished, replaced by practiced efficiency. She checked the knife at her hip, the pistol holstered at her lower back, ammunition too precious to waste but sometimes necessary. Her mental checklist ran through entry protocols, screening questions, decontamination procedures. I'll secure the supplies, Jonah said, already moving toward the back rooms where they kept the more valuable resources hidden from casual visitors. His movements were equally practiced, equally automatic. 8 years had drilled these responses into muscle memory. Mara strode to the reinforced entrance, her boots marking a steady rhythm on the wooden floor. She unbolted the small observation slit built into the heavy door and peered through. Outside, 3 figures picked their way carefully along the path that wound through the deliberate debris field. They moved with the cautious awareness of experienced survivors, avoiding the concealed traps and trigger points with practiced steps. Regulars then. She recognized Rowan's tall, lean silhouette, the deer haunch slung over one shoulder. Beside him walked a smaller figure, B, the newest regular, her sketchbook likely tucked into her jacket. The third was Eli, forever the middleman, constantly moving between survivor groups. Mara watched them navigate the approach, noting their patterns, their awareness. These people had survived 8 years of hell. They'd earned their place at story night, earned the temporary safety of the Last Call's walls. Yet doubt flickered across her face for just a moment. Doubt about the system they'd built, about the traditions that drove people to risk their lives for status, for inclusion in a book of legends. About her own role in allowing it, in facilitating it. Another month survived, she murmured, reaching for the inner bolt. The momentary doubt hardened into resolve. Whatever her misgivings, these were her people. This was the world they had now. Her job was to keep them alive, even when their own choices made that difficult. She unlocked the door and began the careful screening process that would allow them inside. Another story night was beginning. Another chance for glory. Another risk to manage. Behind her, the Book of Legends waited in its case, pages open for new tales of survival in a world that forgave no mistakes.